Hello, everybody. I think we're now live. Welcome to the RVS Virtual Village Hall, and welcome also to Men's Health Week 2025. Pretty kind of significant Men's Health Week, I think, because it's the first Men's Health Week since the UK government promised that they would provide us with a men's health strategy to run alongside the women's health strategy that was set up by the last government. So we're very excited to be involved in that, and it's so, you know, as I say, it's a sort of exciting Men's Health Week for all of us really who've been working in men's health for a while. My name's Jim Pollard. I'm from the Men's Health Forum, as you can see on the screen, and we're going to be talking a little bit about masculinity, this thing that we call masculinity, and its impact on men's health. And I've discovered my slides are working, which is a great relief to me. I'm a writer and a trainer, and I edit the Men's Health Forum's website, and I write and design their training and information materials, and I do this sort of thing. I've been involved with the Men's Health Forum for a long time. I got into men's health because I had cancer in my early 30s. Obviously quite unusual, excuse me, quite unusual. And I wrote a book about that, and I've kind of been writing about and talking about men's health ever since. My most recent book is simply called, rather unimaginatively, Men's Health, and that was published by Haynes. I've also got a new novel out as well, so I feel obliged to plug that, and there they are, my most recent books. That's the end of the plugs. This is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what we mean by masculinity, and I hope that you guys out there are going to help me a little bit with that. There's all sorts of messages going through the chat at the moment, and hopefully you'll be able to join in on chat as well. If you're watching the stream on Facebook or YouTube, I think there's a link there where you can kind of click and join in. I hope that everyone who wants to join in is able to find it. So talk a little bit about what we mean by masculinity, a bit about the impact of the ideas around masculinity on men's physical health, but also the impact of those ideas on men's mental health. You can join in on chat, as I said, on the comment section within whatever platform you're watching the stream on. But you can also, if you want to get involved anonymously, ask a question or make a comment, you can do that using Slido. Again, there's probably a link on the platform that you're streaming on, but if not, you can use that QR code that's on the screen right now, and you'll be able to contribute anonymously, ask a question or whatever. So this is the reason why we're all involved in men's health. I think it's certainly probably the raison d'etre for the Men's Health Forum. 1 in 5 of us males will die before we're old enough to retire. We'll die before the traditional retirement age of 65. So that's one guy in every five-a-side football team, one boy in every boy band. Men's health is taking a serious toll on men in terms of premature death. When we talk about premature death, we're not actually talking about death before the age of 65. We're talking about death before the age of 75, and in that case, 2 in 5 men will die what are traditionally called premature deaths. So we've got a lot of work to do. Obviously, I mentioned the men's health strategy earlier. That is going to make an enormous difference, we hope, and it's really important that we target the various conditions that are taking men's lives so early, like heart disease, cancer, and suicide. Those are not really the topics that we're going to be talking about this morning. We're going to be talking about sort of taking a step back from that, really, and looking at the impact that masculinity has on our health outcomes. This slide will give you a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about here. Taking a step back from the immediate causes of death, you know, whether that might be heart disease or cancer or suicide, to look at what are called the social determinants of men's health, or women's health for that matter. All of these things on the screen are going to have a massive impact on someone's health outcomes, whether they have good work, which in this context means work in which you get the breaks, it's not dangerous, you're not working with dangerous products, but also at the same time you've got some control over your work, you get decent holidays, etc. All those things, the better your work, the more likely you're going to have good health outcomes. Similarly, your surroundings are very important. We all know the benefits of getting out into the green or going for a walk down on the beach or whatever. These things, are tried and proven to have an impact on our health. Money and resources is obviously going to make a big difference. The more money we've got, the more likely we are to be able to buy ourselves decent health resources. Housing, increasingly, I think, is something which we need to think about in terms of its impact on health. Obviously, the clear difference if you're living in a spacious, well-heated, comfortable home compared to living in a overcrowded, damp, mouldy home. Education and skills make a massive difference. Generally, the higher your level of education, the better your health is going to be. The food we eat is going to make a difference, including the food that we're able to eat. Some places, parts of the country, it might be difficult to actually buy healthy food, even if that's the choice that you'd like to make. Discrimination has a big impact on our health. Homophobia, racism, that sort of thing. Transport obviously makes a big difference, whether we have control over our own means of transport and so on. And last but not least, and this will kind of come up again in the discussion, I think, family, friends and communities. The evidence is pretty overwhelming now that the better integrated we are into our communities, our families, our friends, the more kind of human contact that we have in general, the better our health outcomes. And in fact, this is sort of it's such a strong signifier now that being lonely and isolated has been compared to smoking in terms of the level of damage that you can have on your health. Those things, obviously, those social determinants affect men and women. There are some things, though, which affect men more particularly. There is a biological difference between men and women, but it doesn't make a massive impact on our different life expectancies. In general, women live about 4 years longer than men, and it's thought that maybe one of those years is down to biology. That's the protection afforded by chromosomes. That's around hormones. Estrogen protects your heart, testosterone doesn't. Immune systems, all these our immune systems are less good, which is the reason why more men died during COVID, for example. So the big impacts, though, on men's health are lifestyle, the choices often that men make or are able to make, use of services, and that cuts both ways. That's whether men are choosing to use services and whether services are choosing to attract men. And last but not least, and what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the morning, is masculinity and its impact that it has on our health and on our attitudes to our health. So at this point, I do want you guys to do a little bit of work for me, please. I hope everyone's going to be able to join in. I want you to just think back to when you were 8 to 12 years old. And so your formative years, really. What were the sort of things that you were told or you overheard adults saying about men when you were that age? What was the picture that was developing in your young mind about how men should behave? I just want you to kind of think about the statements on the next slide and just complete the sentences for yourself using the chat. Keep the answers, as it says on the screens, 2 or 3 words at a maximum. Go with your gut feeling. Don't overanalyze your thinking. Just complete the sentence in the way that comes to mind. So the first one is, I got the message that men never. So what do men never do? Hopefully a couple of you, this is a big moment of truth here, are going to be able to answer this in the chat for me. Thank you very much, Noel. Be hard, be strong. Cry, says Temi Topi. Cry, says Catherine. Cry, says Simon. Cry, says Marcus. So a lot of unanimity. Thank you very much, you guys who are able to access the chat for joining. I do appreciate that. So quite a lot of unanimity there. I don't know what the age groups of the people who have been able to share there are, but I've done this sort of exercise as part of the forums training in many different ways and with many different groups and in many different parts of the world, in fact, and we get pretty similar answers from all age groups of men. I've trained sort of 17-year-olds up to men in their 70s, and we get a similar sort of range of answers. Let's try the next one. Men always what? I never cry, but they always do what? What might you have heard about how men are when you were in your formative years between the ages of 8 and 12? Men always pay. That's an interesting one. Men are always right. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Men are always correct. Okay, well, you can see where this one's going. So we don't show our emotions, we don't cry, and when we make decisions, when we decide, we're always the ones who are right. We are the ones who have to take responsibility. We're the ones who are head of the family. We may be the breadwinners. Another one, all men are. Anyone want to complete this sentence? Men control family finances. All men are what? Any things you heard which all men are supposed to be? Okay, all men are strong. All men are straight. Very interesting. All men are providers. Thanks very much. So we've got this picture emerging of strength, being decisive, having to take control or wanting to take control, whatever the reason for that, a feeling that you're supposed to make decisions, you're supposed to pay. And how does this all translate into the men's attitude to their health? I mean, what impression did you get about that when you were in your formative years? How should men behave as regards their own health whilst they're busy not crying, providing, making decisions, taking responsibility and knowing best? How would that translate into your attitude to health? Okay, well, perhaps we might see a little bit more of that during the course of what's coming. Yeah, thanks very much, Simon. Not bother. We won't bother. It's we've got quite a lot of other responsibilities going on, really, from the previous answers, and health is quite a long way down the list. Men, as Julie says, are only going to go to the doctors if they're dying. More likely to be focused on fitness and strength, so maybe outward impressions of healthiness, but not necessarily actual health, actual inner health. So where were we hearing all of this stuff? Noel says, my dad nearly cut his finger off with a circular saw, and there was a debate about whether he would go to hospital or not. Yeah, that does actually sound quite familiar. Anyone who's ever seen the TV program 24 Hours in A&E, or any of those similar programs that are on other channels, would have seen that the bloke of a certain age who's had a serious accident in the garden and has been dragged to A&E by someone else. So where were we hearing all these messages from? Where were you getting all these messages that men shouldn't cry, that they need to be strong and decisive and take responsibility and bring home the bacon and not bother about their health? Where were we hearing all this stuff? Parents, yeah, definitely. Very interesting. Dominant dads. Fathers and grandfathers, society, TV, parents, grandparents. Thanks, Catherine. I mean, what normally comes up when we do this of possible information here. So, TV, parents, the media. Noel didn't have a TV then. The that we were getting. As I said, when we've done this what country they're in the world, the answers are often very from everywhere when they're young about how it is that men should be, and boys are hearing this and girls are hearing this, and that's important, I think. So I want to talk a little bit now about this thing called the man box. So have a look at these statements on the screen. They're related a little bit to what we've just been talking about, very much related to what we've just been talking about. Men should figure out their own problems and not ask for help. A guy who doesn't fight back when others push him around is weak. Men should be the ones to bring home the money, not women. Straight guys being friends with gay guys is totally fine. A real man should have as many sexual partners as he can. A man should always have the final say in his relationship or marriage. What do we think about those statements? Any statements that we disagree with out there? Just interested. Don't worry, I'm not going to put you on the spot here. So I need to sort of move on, but just have a little look at those statements and see what you think about them. These statements were make up part of the research that I'm going to talk about. Hopefully you can see this slide. It's a little bit smaller. Unfortunately, we've got the RVS logo over some of it. But anyway, never mind. This is the percentage of people who agree with some of those statements that I just showed. So you can see, which you probably can't because of the logo, but a man who talks a lot about his worries, fears and problems shouldn't really get respect. And in the UK, 31% of young men, this is a survey of young men, I think under 25, might have been under 30, 31% of them anyway agree that a man who talks a lot about his worries, fears and problems really shouldn't get respect. The other one, a guy who doesn't fight back when others push him around, is weak. 41% of young men agreed with that. It is not good for a boy to be taught how to cook, sew, clean the house and take care of younger children. 31% of young men agreed with that. There's a pretty consistent pattern, really, if you look down the list. I mean, there's one positive statement in there: straight guys being friends with gay guys is totally fine and normal. 83% of people agreed with that. But in general, on most of these statements, around 30% of men, maybe up to a third of men, young men in the UK, agree with them. So 25% think men should use violence to get respect if necessary. A real man would never say no to sex. 31% again. I mean, 31% seems to be a pretty common answer to a lot of these. A husband shouldn't have to do household chores. 27%. So most of you out there, just looking at what you've been saying whilst I've been talking, would disagree with most of those statements. As Marcus says, most of you disagree with all of them except number 4, which was the one about straight guys being friends with gay guys. So there's this group of maybe about a third of men who have got quite strong views about how men should be, not dissimilar to some of the things that you guys were hearing when you were younger, that we were all hearing when we were younger, but maybe just taken to the next step, really. So they're a kind of slightly more extreme end of what you might call traditional masculinity. And this research, it's called the Man Box, was done in 2017 by an organisation called Equimundo, and they asked the questions of men in the US, the UK, and Mexico. And as you can, hopefully can see, broadly speaking, the US and the UK are pretty similar, although things slightly different picture in Mexico, where fewer people tending to agree with those statements. So the researchers describe, therefore, this thing called the man box, which they call the more extreme end of traditional masculinity. So that's this box in which there's about a third of men, perhaps, who believe very much in self-sufficiency and acting tough and fighting back, a kind of effortless physical attractiveness. So it's important to look good, but you shouldn't look like you're trying to look good. They have, and this is kind of where it starts getting, I think, important for us to think about, ideas of rigid gender roles, that men should be the financial providers for the family, they should be in charge, strongly heterosexual, sometimes, but not always, homophobic. This idea of hypersexuality, having as many partners as possible, but also prepared to use aggression and control and violence when necessary, and a feeling that they should have the final say in a relationship. Hendrik on the chat's asking, have I any idea what those numbers were like 30 years ago? Not these numbers precisely, Hendrik, but I'm going to show you another slide in a minute, which will enable us to see how these ideas vary across the generations. So, as I say, we've got this research identifies a group of about a third of men who have this kind of quite traditional, extremely traditional view of how men should behave. So, which obviously raises the question: so what's that got to do with men's health? And this is what it's got to do with men's health. the more men believe and act upon these traditional notions of masculinity, the poorer their health outcomes. So also in the man box research, men who adhere to the rules of the man box, people with these kind of more extreme, at the more extreme end of traditional masculinity, they're more likely to put their health and well-being at risk. They're more likely to resist seeking help. They're also more likely to experience depression, to think frequently about ending their own lives, to have used violence against other young men or have experienced violence themselves, to engage in risky behaviours, binge drinking or traffic accidents. They're more likely to be in accidents. They're more likely to sexually harass women. And again, last but not least, really, think back to what I was saying about the social determinants of health. They're the most likely not to have close relationships or friendships, and that kind of makes sense. You know, we're supposed to be strong and silent. If you're right at the as men, if you strongly believe that, you are less likely to have close male friends. So, my slides seem to stop working. So that raises the question, and this sometimes someone, if I'm doing this in real life or even on Zoom, someone will shout out, but isn't all this natural? Isn't the idea of masculinity that we all discussed earlier, isn't that actually natural? That's how men are born. I don't know what people think about that. In a sense, though, my argument would be that it doesn't really matter. If you believe that, fine. But whether you think man box attitudes are a natural part of what it is to be a male human, if you think that in some way there's something evolutionary going on here or whatever, or whether you think it's a learned social construct, something that we just pick up as we grow up, in the same way as we pick up language and other aspects of education, whichever one of those you happen to believe, the evidence is that these attitudes are not a lot of use to men anymore. As I say, we've just seen the impact that it's going to have, the negative impact that it's going to have on their health. And you wonder, what's the crossover between those 1 in 5 men who are dying before the age of 65 and that group of men in the man box? Noel's starting to talk about channeling non-masculine feelings into more acceptable ones, such as fear or insecurity into anger. And I think that's a really interesting point, and I am going to come on to that, I think. So whether you think it's natural or whether it's not, I think it's important we try to understand the impact that those ideas are having on men's health. And what does this mean for health services? I think that it means that healthcare providers need to meet men where they are. So we need to be recognising that some men have these attitudes, and we need to try and figure out ways to talk to them. So I don't think we should just be ignoring them. We need to find ways to reach them, and that's a problem that the NHS clearly has at the moment. We're constantly talking about men not using health services, and one of the reasons is that they're clearly not designed for men. They're clearly not designed for all men, because there is this group of men who feel a particular way and have and therefore are likely to have certain attitudes to services. So perhaps we need to think about health services that give men more control. Perhaps there's more anonymity, so that you don't have to sacrifice what you may see as your male pride to ask for help. Perhaps, therefore, services could be provided more online. Perhaps we can try and think about mental health interventions that are not entirely built around the benefits of talking. Now, personally, I strongly believe in the benefits of talking. And if we can create situations in which other men are in contact with other men, they may then start to talk to them. But if we're telling them all the time at the start that the thing they have to do is talk, that might be a challenge. And Noel's put something else in the chat, which with words which I'm not even sure I know what they mean. Thanks very much, Noel. So that's kind of what I think this man box thing means for our health services. And I just want to give an example here from the Men's Health Forum's work about how perhaps we can reach these guys better. We did this thing called Man MOT. We've done a number of projects called Man MOT because we think it's a great title for something. But in this particular project called Man MOT, men could chat online with a health professional. So you just logged on. The only piece of information that you had to give, because we wanted to see how we could, this worked with in terms of reaching out to men in different social groups. The only piece of information we asked for was someone's postcode, no other information. So it was completely anonymous apart from that. Now, I don't know if you've used 111 recently. Obviously, 111 is not just a telephone service, it is theoretically an online service. But if you go on to 111, well, if you phone it or if you go online, it will ask you a hell of a lot of personal questions before you get the chance to actually speak to someone. And we just stripped all of those away and just put people in touch with a GP straight away. It wasn't just GPs. We've done it with mental health professionals as well, and we've done it with other health professionals. But if you look, I hope you can see it. If you look at the slide on the left, sorry, on the right-hand side, it shows you the postcodes by deprivation level. So 1 on the left is the 10% of postcodes that are the most deprived in the country, and 10 on the right is the 10% of postcodes that are least deprived. So we're looking at deciles of population here, and you can see that Man MOT chat got lots and lots of guys from the poorer parts of the country, and that is something that at the moment the NHS is less good at doing. And so I do think that Man MOT proves that there are ways of getting men to use services if we think about it. Men used Man MOT for all these reasons: reassurance, specific professional advice from an expert, have context for their GP consultation, and to have a second opinion to verify health advice. And I think that the third one of those is really important, because it sounds like I'm being quite negative about some of these sort of masculine ideas. But I do think that the idea that men don't want to be a burden on someone else is an important part of all of this stuff. So often when you talk to men, they're reluctant to go and see the GP because they don't want to waste their time. And that's partly because they'll be embarrassed if they've wasted the GP's time, because that will undermine perhaps their sense of their knowledge and that understanding of themselves, and so i.e. their male pride. But also they are genuinely concerned about wasting other people's time, because that's part of what it is to be a man. So we found Man MOT provided a lot of guys with an excuse to go and see the doctor because someone else had told them. Another health professional said, yeah, you really should go and see the GP about this. And these are some of the barriers it overcame. I mean, I haven't gone into this today, but obviously one of the massive barriers to men going to the GP is they have to take time off work to do it. The number of GP surgeries that are open outside normal working hours is increasing, but it's still not great. And because men are far more likely to work full time than women, it's far more difficult for them to find time. And that leads to the second problem, the inconvenience of arranging a GP appointment. And people feeling anxious about interacting with the GP and feeling they've not got enough time. As it says there, men often wait until they have more than one concern before visiting the GP, and the feeling that they might be unable to adequately express themselves during the GP consultation, again, feeling embarrassed or inadequate in that conversation. So, Man MOT was kind of able to really break down some of these barriers, give guys the language that they needed to go and talk to their doctors. And that was very empowering. So there's nothing wrong with meeting men where they are, and that may well lead to better health outcomes. Going back to the man box, what does that mean? We talked earlier about the fact that the men's health strategy is going to be hopefully developing during the course of this Parliament. At the moment, the government's consulting with interested stakeholders, and we're very keen to see what's going to happen. And I think that what we need to be doing in the men's health strategy is, as it says here, people who are interested in improving men's health need to be able to look in both directions at once. We need to be encouraging men to think outside the man box, but we need to be encouraging the NHS and others to meet men where they are and sometimes think inside the man box in order to find the men. And the reason for that is that I think this is going to be, or we think this is going to be an increasing problem because of this thing called the manosphere. And I know I can see the names of some people on the chat who I know. There's people out there who know a lot more about the manosphere than I do. But let's just look at the next slide, and this does answer a question that came up in the chat earlier. It's kind of hopefully what Hendrik was talking about. This is a different piece of research. It's an Ipsos poll, and it was conducted across the world. So this is not just men in the UK, but I do still nonetheless think it's instructive. It's the percentage of men who agree that a man who stays home to look after his children is less of a man. Generally, more men than women agreed with that. But if you look at across the top, you can see the generation. So we've got the baby boomers born after the war, Gen X born in the sort of 60s to mid 70s, the millennials who came generally considered to be people who came of age around the millennium, and Gen Z, who are the kind of youngish adult generation that we have at the moment. You can see that the number of people who agree with that actually increases quite a bit. Millennials and Gen Z, again, we've got that number 31% again, in a completely different piece of research. It's pretty interesting. 31% agree of millennials, millennial men and Gen Z men, that a man who stays at home to look after his children is less of a man, compared to just 10% of baby boomers. And you can also see, though, which I do think is interesting, increases in the number of women who believe that as well. There's loads of really interesting things in the chat, and I'm struggling to read them and talk at the same time. So I'm not going to. I'll come back to them later when we get onto a discussion. So yes, so this is increasing. Good grief! And the reason why I include this slide, and I include this slide in pretty much every talk I ever do, because it is quite amazing. I think a lot of us have thought, especially people, the older people. I'm early Gen X, so I think we thought that attitudes were changing for the better during the course of our lifetimes. People have become more tolerant of different sorts of behaviour, and the idea that men shouldn't look after their kids was really, for the Victorian age. But that clearly, is not the case. And it's a little bit of a shock for us, I think, and a bit of a surprise for us to see that the idea of continual progress is absolutely not true. Things can go back, things can go down, things can get worse. So this is what they're talking about in the manosphere. Simon's kind of slightly anticipated this slide, and this is incredibly short and brief, and there's a whole load of stuff. And I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on the manosphere. I don't spend a lot of time there for reasons that should probably become obvious. But they're talking about, and by the manosphere, I'm really talking about that part of the internet, social media platforms, but also other websites and so on, where they're talking about a particular sort of masculinity, which again is at that extreme end of masculinity as defined by the man box research. So we're talking here, these are the guys who are in the man box and are very happy to be there. Certainly the so-called influencers who are pushing this idea. And so they're talking about dominant men, submissive females. There's this idea of the red pill, the blue pill, and the black pill. And the red pill is people who get it, get how society is rigged against men. And the blue pill is for people like me who don't. They talk about alphas and betas in terms of men. So this kind of structure, hierarchy of men. And the difference between alphas and betas is around looks and physical strength. They talk about this idea of the 80-20 rule, which is that 80% of women are apparently attracted to 20% of men. I think these guys are often very keen to say that this is how men are have naturally evolved to be. But so if they're very keen on the idea of evolution. But I think if it was true that 80% of women were attracted to 20% of men, the human race wouldn't have got this far. We probably would have died out before. I'm not quite able to do the maths myself, but I wouldn't be surprised. They talk about, there's this stuff about incels for people who are men who are involuntarily celibate, and apparently the kidney bean and the coffee bean emojis are often used to designate incels. They talk about chads and stasis. I'm really just putting some terminology up here. So if you're interested in finding out more about them, the manosphere, you can. Chads, I think, are alpha males. So they would be the 20% that 80% of women are attracted to, and the stasis are the particularly attractive, highly feminine women to which who chads get together with. The manosphere might also be talking about men's rights, so ideas that in some ways men are losing out in societies in some way structured against them. Someone used the term patriarchy earlier, so these guys do not believe in the patriarchy in any way. That they don't see that in our history, and they certainly don't see that in our present. And they actually think the opposite, that in some ways the world's been structured for the benefit of women. And lastly, the other thing they're often talking about is kind of quite faddy, sort of Stone Agey kind of diets, and often the rejection of mainstream medicine. So maybe around vaccines, but around other things as well. Marcus has just made an interesting argument about the 20 and 80% thing. I don't know. I don't think there's anything. Hendrik says, what's wrong with men's rights? I'm not saying there is anything wrong with men's rights, but there's nothing wrong with women's rights, and there's certainly nothing wrong with human rights. The problem is that when people start talking about men's rights in the way that I'm talking about it here, they're talking about it in the sense that men are in some way being oppressed and need to have rights because they've had them taken away from them. And I think that the evidence of history and the evidence of society today is that that's just simply not true. But we all have rights as human beings. There's no doubt about that. So that's a little bit about them, just the manosphere, just if you're interested in looking a bit more into what they're talking about, really. This explains how the manosphere works, and I think it's important to be aware of this in a way. And it's a kind of protection racket. You have these influencers who construct a threat based on the audience's existing grievances, and I think it's fair to say that young men do have some pretty good grievances. If you look back at those social determinants of health, I think it's very hard for us to honestly say that young people have got good access to those things. We don't have, good work. Our surroundings are deteriorating. The environment is deteriorating. Housing is poor and unaffordable. Education is not as good as it should be. Money and resources are not as well shared out as they should be, and not as well shared out as they used to be. So all of these things in all these areas, and even the bottom one as well, family, friends, and communities. The way we live our lives now online makes these things more difficult to maintain. Not in some ways, not easier. And you can have an argument about that, I guess. But I don't think it's unfair to say, looking at these, that there are legitimate grievances out there that young people might have, which can be exploited by these so-called influencers online. They use social media and whatever to propagate a threat, creating a sense of impending catastrophe. They offer protection against that threat, often monetized in their benefit through monetized social media, videos, courses, how to pick women up, all that sort of stuff. The audience accepts the influencer's solution. The influencer expands his influence using his racketeered resources. So it's very much operates a little like a protection racket, I think, out there with these social media influencers. And the threat is the kind of key thing, I guess, in this kind of influencer racket. What is the threat that the influencer is saying is out there going to get you, and it's going to create this impending catastrophe? For the manosphere, it's women, or more specifically, feminism. Other influencers, as it says there, target other easy to see groups, immigrants, or other groups in what we sometimes hear called the culture wars, when in fact the real cause is more to do with the economy. As I think, when we just looked at that slide around the social determinants of health, you can see that those problems are political problems. They can be solved by changing the way the economy works. Very briefly, I'm running out of time a little bit here. I want to look at just kind of stuff related to symptoms of male mental health problems and how that might link into a little bit of what we've been saying. These two lists on the screen now are short versions of the screening instruments used for diagnosing perinatal depression. There's a sort of if you look at the one on the left-hand side, those are the kind of traditional markers used to measure depression, and on the right-hand side is a kind of more one which is more effective with men. And you can see there's kind of slight differences in the way that these symptoms are kind of pitched. So on one side, there's talking about crying, talking about hurting yourself, talking about feeling anxious, and all of these are things which maybe some men will find it difficult to sort of identify with. So if you're asking guys questions based on these statements, it's quite likely you're going to conclude that they're not depressed. However, if you ask them questions based on the right ones on the right hand side, the so-called Gotland scale, you might find that you're diagnosing more men with, in this case, postnatal depression. But I mean, these sorts of questions could be used with men in other circumstances as well. So we're talking about feeling burnt out, feeling aggressive, feeling gloomy, and feeling having suicidal thoughts, excessive consumption of alcohol, and so on. So these other things which may be more indicative of mental health challenges for men. And many of these behaviours, so withdrawal, repressing emotions, rejected support, low self-esteem, insecurity, excessive time on particular apps and websites, obsession with physical appearance, can also be signs of boys and young men being influenced by the manosphere. So there seems to me there's kind of a bit of an overlap here between getting dragged down the manosphere rabbit hole and showing signs of mental ill health. Men often self-medicate, and this is men of all ages, not just young men. We prefer to change the way we feel rather than talk about the way we feel, which can lead to addictive behaviour. We'd rather drink so that we feel different rather than talking about what it is that's made us depressed, or we might be gambling, or various other behaviours which can lead to addiction. And we look at the questions that we traditionally asked around addiction. If we normally we might replace X on this with do you think about drinking? So X could be drinking, or about gambling, or about pornography, or I don't know, it could be anything really. Shopping, exercise, work, all of these things, we can become addictive behaviours. But we could also obviously put the smartphone in there as well, because whatever your drug of choice, you can get it easily and in larger quantities with a smartphone. So that's kind of amplifying all this stuff that we're talking about, which is why many campaigners for online safety talk about addiction by design, so that the phones themselves are designed to get you addicted to your drug of choice, whether that is drink or whether that is conversations in the manosphere. The forum produces some manuals. I'm just going to mention the ones about addiction because that's kind of where this conversation has been leading, I think. Serious drinking, porn free, wanna bet, they deal with some of the common addictions that particularly affect men. That's the end of what I'm going to say. I'm just going to have a little look at what we've got in the chat here. Let me see. I'm not sure how far I need to go back here. I'm going to go back to Noel's biopsychosocial aspects. So defining emotions like empathy as non-masculine limits the discussion, hinders access to the skills needed to deal with this side. I totally agree. Men seem to be prepared to be involved in doing activities, either carpentry or vehicle maintenance, and social connections can happen in the margins. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I'm talking about now when I'm talking about not seeing mental health interventions as having to focus on talking, doing something. Men seem to like. We function better perhaps when we're side by side, shoulder to shoulder, rather than when we're facing each other across a table, a bit like a therapist and a client. If we're doing something together, even something as simple as going for a walk or driving together in the car, it's often much easier to have a conversation. So I think that's absolutely spot on. Marcus, very instructive attitude, surprisingly heading in a more reactionary direction across genders. That, I mean, and that's that slide, isn't it? Which is very, very scary in a way. Simon's anticipating what I was saying about the 2080 argument, and Marcus says, while the 2080 is a weird and grim incel worldview, the gendered reality of dating app experiences does encourage this grim worldview. I'm very lucky, Marcus. I've never used a dating app because I've been with my partner since I think 1992. I know 1992. So I've never had to use a dating app, but I'm sure that's absolutely right. Yeah, Hendricks recommending Richard Reeves' book, which I'm happy to endorse. I don't know if you can see me on the screen. It's called Of Boys and Men. And Julie mentioned Laura Bates' book, Men Who Hates Women. Laura Bates is a journalist on The Guardian, I think. I haven't read that book, I must admit. You've given a great overview of manosphere ideologies, actually. Well, thank you, Marcus. Not women, but politics. I'm guessing that's the cause of the problem, is it? Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that I'm agreeing with Richard Reeves on that. The male backlash for the little progress that women have made in gains towards equality. Yeah, part of that is obviously behind this stuff about men's rights and an idea that in some ways, men are losing out. And someone put it to me once, which I do think is perhaps a good way of putting it, that when you've been on top for so long, even equality feels like repression, that may be the way that it's been for men with women for many years of history, and for white people with black people for very many years of history. And so even the equality suddenly feels like in some ways, that we white men are being oppressed. Terence Real has an interesting perspective and graph regarding male depression in his book, I Don't Want to Talk About It. sounds interesting, Kimball. I don't know. The benefit of the majority of these qualities being socially inherited, there is greater potential for them to be changed. I absolutely, totally agree with that, Noel, and that's obviously one of the reasons why those of us working in men's health do it, really, because we do think that these things can be changed. Noel's also recommending Big Boys Don't Cry, which contains lived experience testimonies, including, I'm pretty sure, mine. I think I wrote a piece in that book. We're just coming to the end of the hour. If anybody out there who's got any comments that they'd like to just share before we wind up, very happy to read them to everybody so that we can all share the really good comments that have been posted in here. Looks like Hendrik and Kimball need to have a chat offline. Simon wants the slides. Simon, contact me offline and I can talk to you about that. I can't just give the slides out, I'm afraid. But like what you can do is if you're interested in seeing this again, it's going to be up on the Virtual Village Hall for about 3 months. Thank you, Noel. This topic really needs focus. I'm grateful for your efforts today. I hope, yeah, they were just efforts, I guess. I hope there was some interesting stuff in there, and that's probably a good point on which to leave it. Marcus says, beyond equality, engaging in some promising youth work around the manosphere, but beyond equality, the organisation. Excellent talk. Thanks, Jim. Thank you very much, Alan. And a reminder, Alan's reminding everybody to respond to the men's health strategy. I should have said that at the top, really. The consultation on the men's health strategy is not just for organisations like the Men's Health Forum, it's for all organisations and also for all individuals. So, you know, everybody here could respond to that. Just look for Men's Health Strategy on gov.uk. I don't have the link to hand right this minute. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Everyone's saying thank you very much. So thank you guys for listening, and really, really grateful to you all for participating. Thanks very much.